Black screen. The faint sound of chains rattles in the darkness. A woman's whisper trembles through the air, soft, terrified, and then gone. Silence swallows everything. They called it civilization. The voice begins, steady but heavy, but hidden beneath lace and luxury, beneath prayer and propriety, were crimes no one dared to speak of. Unspeakable acts that lived in the dark corners of plantation homes, buried behind the smiling masks of white power. The sound of wind slides through the cracks of old wooden shutters. A candle flickers over fine china, over polished mahogany tables, symbols of wealth and control. But just beyond the candlelight, in the rooms that no visitor entered, the air was different, filthy, nasty, heavy with secrets that could break your heart. History tells us of whips, chains, and fields of cotton. The narrator continues. But there were other chains, invisible, intimate, designed to silence. There were women whose screams were never written down, whose tears were never seen. Their pain was locked behind doors that history refused to open. The voice grows quieter, more intimate. What happens when those with no voice are owned by those who control their every breath? When silence becomes the only way to survive? A slow fade to the soft light of dawn over sprawling fields. The sound of insects hums beneath the distant cracking of a whip. The beauty of the plantation stretches wide white columns, blooming magnolias, golden light on green. Yet beneath the beauty lies something rotten. They called it paradise, the narrator says bitterly. But for the enslaved, it was a beautiful hell. The smell of cotton mixed with sweat and fear. Every step was watched, every movement controlled, and every word could mean punishment or worse. Women rise before dawn, their hands rough and tired before the sun even breaks. They cook, clean, nurse white children, and bear the burden of white cruelty. Their voices never echo beyond the quarters. They live in forced obedience, knowing the price of disobedience is pain or death. They were forced to smile, the voice whispers. To serve, to survive even when survival meant surrender. The scene shifts inside the grand house. A white mistress in a silk gown walks across the polished floors. She commands the household with quiet cruelty. Her gaze is sharp, her authority absolute within those walls. And yet, she too is trapped in a world built on domination. Her power is the power allowed to her, the power to control others, to inflict pain where she herself cannot escape it. The plantation, the voice says, was a theater of control, a performance of power. Every gesture, every rule, every punishment designed to remind the enslaved who held their lives in her hands. The narrator pauses. But the control did not stop at labor. It went deeper into the private, the forbidden, the filthy reaches of ownership. The camera drifts through the hallways, showing locked doors, curtained windows, candlelight spilling from cracks in the floorboards. The system of slavery was not just about bodies that worked, the voice continues. It was about bodies that could be used, touched, violated, and owned. It was control beyond chains, control over every breath, every womb, every heartbeat. For enslaved women, there was no line between survival and submission. A glance from the master could seal their fate. A command could not be refused. Pregnancy wasn't a choice, the voice says grimly. It was a business model. The sound of a baby crying fills the air. The camera lingers on a woman sitting alone, her arms cradling a newborn. Her face is blank, numb. She knows the child is not hers to keep. She knows what will happen when the mistress sees the child's skin. Children born of ownership were born into chains, the narrator says, and the mothers, they bore the shame alone. Outside, the mistress watches from a balcony, her face a mask of disdain. She knows. She knows her husband's crimes, his nightly visits, his dirty secrets, and yet her anger does not turn toward him, it turns toward the women he uses, the enslaved women she commands. In the hierarchy of slavery, the voice says, the white mistress was both oppressed and empowered, denied freedom in her own way yet granted dominion over others. Her jealousy could be deadly, her revenge, merciless. A woman's cry echoes from the quarters, the whip cracks. The mistress turns away, her expression cold, composed. The scene fades to black. But some abuses, the voice murmurs, were too dark, too filthy, too vile, even for the records to hold. Soft piano keys begin, low and haunting. The narrator's tone deepens. Behind closed doors, slavery became something worse than labor. It became obsession. The white master's need for control didn't stop with work or obedience, it invaded the most private places of a person's soul. Night falls again. The plantation house looms like a tomb. Candles flicker behind thick curtains. The sound of footsteps approaches a door, slow, deliberate. The latch clicks. She knows what's coming, the voice whispers. Every night, she prays for the footsteps to pass her door. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. A pause, silence, the faint sound of wind through the fields. In the dark, power took whatever it wanted, the narrator says. And when the sun rose, the world pretended nothing had happened. The voice turns somber. These were the crimes that civilization refused to see, the hidden truths buried under respectability, the nasty underbelly of the so-called Southern charm. The piano fades, the wind grows louder. In the light they called them servants, the voice says. In the dark they were victims of unspeakable acts. The voice. Dawn rises over the fields again, golden light touching the cotton like fire on frost. But there is no peace in this beauty, only the quiet hum of suffering that never left. The voice returns, lower now, heavy with sorrow. For the enslaved women, each morning was a continuation of the night before. Their pain didn't end with sunrise, it simply changed shape. What began in darkness lived on in silence, the silence they were forced to carry. A young woman walks toward the fields, her steps slow, her face expressionless. She carries within her a wound that will never heal, one that cannot be spoken of. Around her, the others know, but they do not ask. They cannot. To name what happened would be to invite more punishment, more cruelty. Their silence, the narrator says, was their armor, their only weapon in a world that fed on their obedience. But the silence came with a cost. Inside that silence, shame grew, fear multiplied. And across generations, the weight of that unspoken horror became part of Black memory, the inherited trauma of a people forced to swallow pain so deep it shaped their very DNA. Imagine carrying both your oppressor's child and your own shame, the voice says, trembling, and being told to sing in the fields as if nothing happened. A faint hymn drifts across the plantation, women's voices rising and falling in rhythm with their labor. The song is haunting, full of hidden meaning. Beneath the words of faith is a plea for mercy that will never come. The wombs of these women became weapons of empire, the narrator continues. Each child born from rape was another piece of property, another prophet, another reminder that even creation itself had been twisted into control. The camera cuts to a close-up of a mother's hands calloused, trembling, gently fixing a child's clothes. Her eyes are filled with love, fear, and something deeper, the knowledge that her child might be taken from her, sold, or punished for simply existing. This was the cruelty of it all, the voice whispers. To love what the system told you not to nurture a child that the law said you did not own. The sound fades, replaced by distant thunder, the kind that rolls through deep southern skies. The narrator's tone hardens. For centuries, these stories were erased. History books told of strong men and noble causes, of wars fought and nations built. But they forgot the women. They forgot the wombs that built this world, the tears that watered its soil. Images flash, old diary pages, plantation ledgers, the neat handwriting of white owners recording births without names of fathers. Evidence hidden in plain sight, the voice says. Even in their records, you can feel the cruelty: children listed as assets, mothers reduced to numbers, human lives written like livestock. And yet, amid all the silence, some dared to speak. Slowly, quietly, through whispers, songs, and stories passed from mother to daughter. History cannot stay buried forever, the voice declares. The whispers became words, the words became voices, and the voices began to rise. Cut to a candlelit room. A woman sits writing by hand, Harriet Jacobs. Her eyes flicker with fear and resolve. She wrote what no one wanted to hear, the narrator says softly. The truth about pursuit, about hiding, about the unspeakable war waged on women's bodies. Pages turn. Her words were rebellion. They tore the mask off Southern gentility and showed the dirty heart beneath. As her story spreads, others begin to remember fragments, testimonies, journal entries from long-dead mistresses and overseers. Even in their letters, the voice continues. You can hear the raw jealousy, cruelty, and the casual confession of things too disturbing to speak aloud. A slow fade to black, the sound of a ticking clock. In the archives, in the diaries, in the DNA of the descendants, the truth still screams, the voice whispers. It survived every attempt to silence it. It bled through time. Then comes the reckoning: historians, scholars, and activists confronting the myth of the benevolent South. They gave us tales of Southern charm, the voice says, laced with anger, but never the screams that echoed through the night. The screen flashes images of old films, faded posters, novels that glorified plantations as romantic sanctuaries. They told the world of chivalry, the narrator scoffs, but they never spoke of the blood that soaked the bedsheets, of the women who were never allowed to say no. The tone shifts, mournful but defiant. America built its wealth on bodies it refused to call human. Every brick of its foundation carries the echo of those who were forced to serve. And now, centuries later, we are still learning how to look at that truth without turning away. A pause. But even now, the voice says, some truths remain buried, locked behind the polite walls of memory, behind textbooks that choose to forget. Cut to a quiet scene, descendants of enslaved women walking the grounds of old plantations. Their hands brush against the walls, the old wood that still carries the scent of sweat and sorrow. These places, the voice says, remember. The land remembers. The air still hums with stories that were never told. The sound fades into a low hum, like a heartbeat. Power corrupted everything it touched, the narrator says softly. It blurred love, desire, and control into something filthy, something that history didn't have the language to describe. The screen darkens. It wasn't about passion, the voice continues. It was about power, the belief that some bodies existed only to serve. And then, the final reflection. Soft music. A slow camera moved through empty rooms. Sunlight filters through broken shutters, catching dust in the air like spirits rising. They couldn't speak then, the narrator says, voice trembling with emotion. But we can now. Women's names appear on screen, names once lost in ledgers and forgotten graves. The voice grows softer, more reverent. These weren't just stories of cruelty. They were stories of survival, of women who carried the world inside them and lived long enough for their truth to be heard. A long pause. And every time we speak their names, the voice says, the silence breaks a little more. Fade to black. To the women who endured what history tried to erase, the narrator whispers, this story is yours.